British by birth and American by residence. It is important to me that those same strands of inclusivity that flow through me are mirrored in the stories that we tell. One World is a place where Africa has an equal seat at the global table alongside Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Every continent has a voice, and where everyone watching has a stake in the global conversation.
One World with Zain Asher, tonight on CNN.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Live from CNN London, this is Connect the World with Becky Anderson.
An historic agreement by the EU to ban the vast majority of Russian oil by year's end. This the latest effort to starve the Kremlin's war coffers. All the while, Russia continues to make gains in eastern Ukraine. This hour, from London to Islamabad, a look at how the ripple effects of this war are affecting you. I'm Becky Anderson. Hello and welcome back to Connect the World. Well, as Russia remains defiant in the face of sanctions from the West, the European Union is trying to deal a new blow to the Kremlin's war in Ukraine. The compromise for a partial Russian oil ban took weeks to hammer out. Now it blocks more than two-thirds of Russian oil imports immediately and 90% of Russian oil imports by the end of the year. Now, the head of the European Commission says, and I quote here, EU member states are coming together to strengthen their sustainable energy supply. Have a listen.
The renewable energy has the big advantage that it is not only good for the climate, but it is also good for our independence and good for our security of supply, and it creates jobs at home.
Well, that may be the aim, and we can talk about, when renewable energy will really be front and centre in Europe momentarily. But CNN's Anna Stewart covering all of this here in London. Let's just talk about this deal in and of itself. What do we know about it at this point?
So we know that it's taken weeks to get to this point, and that hasn't shown great unity for the EU, but they have reached a deal on the oil embargo, and this was one element of the sixth round of sanctions. First 5 rounds went through no problems at all. We're starting to see disunity, and it was largely over oil, and it was coming from the landlocked countries that will struggle to replace Russian oil. So what we're seeing here is really an exemption for Hungary, Slovakia and Czech Republic, who will still be able to get their oil from Russia via a pipeline. There is an exemption for one stretch of a pipeline. It's also, though, a timing issue. From experts, the time it's taken to reach this deal, the time it will take for the full embargo to take effect, Russia has had lots and lots of time to look for other customers. So that's also weakening it. And this was something that the chief diplomat for the EU spoke about today.
Certainly, we cannot prevent Russia to sell their oil to someone else. We're not so powerful, but we are the most important client for Russia. They will have to look for another one, and certainly they will have to decrease the price. The purpose is for the Russians to get less resources, less financial resources to feed in the war machine, and this certainly will happen.
2 really key points there. First of all, yes, the EU is a really important customer, the biggest customer for Russia. It will be harder to ship elsewhere. And also the price. And we're looking at incredibly high prices for oil across the board right now. Russian oil is already trading at a big discount. It's about $34 a barrel cheaper. So it will be hard to keep up the sort of revenue it's been getting from the EU up to this point, which has been $10 billion a month just for oil.
Yeah, and it will look elsewhere. And we know that there are countries willing to pay for cheap Russian oil at this point. The EU imports, as I understand, about a third of its oil from Russia. It is going to have to make up that shortfall because, let's be quite frank, it hasn't weaned itself off oil yet, whatever von der Leyen says about renewables taking over going forward.
Big investments for renewables, but what about right now? So it currently gets 2.4 million barrels a day from Russia. It needs to replace over 2 million barrels a day of that, given this embargo is 90%. Where's it going to get from? Well, first of all, Russia's oil, cheap oil, should reach other customers. Some oil will come into the market there. But you're going to need some spare capacity if you want that oil price to come down. And therefore, everyone looks to OPEC, where there is spare capacity, at least from Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They could produce maybe 3 million barrels a day more than they currently do. Will they ramp up production? I don't think we're going to see any big changes at the meeting this week. I think they'll carry on with a steady approach of steady increases in outputs each month. They like the price where it is. The US could put more shale onto the market as well, but I think we are looking at really tight market and high prices for some time to come.
And let's remind ourselves that is an OPEC Plus meeting this week, which of course
includes Russia.
Correct. Thank you. Middle East nations hold almost half of the world's proven oil reserves. For a deeper dive into what the region can do as Europe tries to stymie Moscow's war effort in Ukraine by weaning itself off Russia's oil, do head to CNN.com. And, of course, don't forget the app. Well, why is this all important? Well, as the EU tries to thwart the Kremlin's war machine, Russian forces are making steady progress in eastern Ukraine. Here they are, pushing into the centre of Severodonetsk, a key city in a region known as Luhansk, one of two regions that make up the Donbass. Now, you can see almost the entire region is now under Russian control. CNN's Nick Paton-Walsh travelled to another pocket of Ukrainian resistance, and he filed this report for you.
This is the last road into Lysychansk. Putin's forces have moved with rare focus here and may soon encircle the pocket of two cities on a river we're driving into. The Ukrainian forces we saw here, mobile, tense, at times edgy. And this is why. Across the river here, the besieged city of Severodonetsk, increasingly more in Russian hands, whoever you ask. We can hear the crackle of gunfire down towards the river below.
Well, we were told the Russians have tried already to get into town, and it looks like we might be witnessing another attempt over there. That smoke near one of the remaining bridges into the city.
Our police escorts shout drone, often used to direct artillery attacks. We are on high ground, exposed and scattered. It is a tale of two desperations here. That which makes people stay, and that which makes them finally flee. Leonid is the latter. Some who stay are increasingly angry at what's left of the Ukrainian state here. A young woman was killed here a day earlier by a shell. And locals told us not to film, saying cameras attracted shelling. Russia's bloody persistence and unbridled firepower is bringing the kind of victory in the ruins they seem to cherish. This cinema was a bomb shelter, local officials said. It's unclear if, when their huge airstrike hit, the Russian military was aware it had been emptied days earlier.
Just startling how whole chunks of this cinema have been thrown into the crater there. There's just the ferocity of the airstrikes we're seeing here, designed simply to get people out of this town.
Those who stay among the shards of glass feel abandoned already.
Many people, but there is no gas or water or power or anything. We asked the aid workers today when it will all come back, and they said there are only prostitutes, junkies, and alcoholics left. That means the aid workers have left here.
Lydia is carefully picking up the pieces of the airstrike, which she felt the full force of in her apartment 8 floors up. There's an old lady on the first floor and me with my disabled son, she says. He doesn't really understand a war's happening.
Retreat lingers in the empty air. If Putin takes here, he may claim he's achieved some of his reduced goals in this invasion. It's now the unenviable choice of Ukraine's leaders. If this is the hill its men and women will die on. Nick Paton-Walsh, CNN, Lysychansk, Ukraine.
Well, Melissa Bell, my colleague, is connecting us today from Zaporizhzhia in southeastern Ukraine. Nick's piece focusing there on just one area. What's happening? What's the broader picture at this point?
I'd like to take you, Becky, further along that front line, because essentially it goes from Severodonetsk, where the worst of that fighting, you just showed those images a moment ago, has been going on. That is the city we understand that even now appears to be falling. Remember, with some 15,000 civilians still trapped inside. That line now goes from Severodonetsk all the way down essentially to Kherson ever since the fall of Mariupol. And what that means is that you have a front line along the edge of which I'm standing here in Zaporizhia. This is the Dnieper River just behind me. It is 30 miles to the south of here, just along that river, that you have the closest town under Russian control. What we've been seeing over the course of the last few days is an intensification of fighting in places like this, far to the south of Severodonetsk as well. This city, Zaporizhia, the scene of cruise missile hits, 3 that struck, 1 that was intercepted just these last 5 days. But also, we keep hearing outgoing artillery fire towards those positions, and we keep hearing and seeing evidence of villages beyond that Vasilivka that is 30 miles from here that are subject to artillery fire from Russian forces, but also those long-range rockets coming from further away that Ukrainians now say they desperately need precisely to be able to target those positions, Becky.
And just for the benefit of our viewers who won't be as imbued in the machinations of all of this and want to really have a sense of why this is all important, can you explain the significance of the area seeing this heavy fighting?
Well, that line that I mentioned that divides essentially those parts of Ukraine that are now held by Russia and those parts of Ukraine that are not, on the edge of which I'm standing, is much more than a military front line. What we're seeing increasingly is that line hardened. So I mentioned the village of Vasilivka. There have been civilians trying to come over to the Ukrainian side of the line for several days. They'd been held back by Russian forces. Of course, so many Ukrainians have fled these last few weeks from Mariupol, from Kherson, and they've been coming to this sideline. What we're seeing now are some of them wanting to go back, to get back to their families on the other side, to get back to what's left of their homes, and that are finding it so difficult to cross those lines that they find themselves living inside cars, in camp areas that are growing by the day. The border, essentially, that line is being shut down. And it's happening also on a communication level. We've just been hearing from Ukrainian officials, and it's something we've been hearing from everyone around us here, that communications to Russian-controlled Ukraine have essentially been cut off. So you can't use your mobile phone, you have no more internet access, you can't reach your relatives on that side of the line. And just in Zaporizhia region, there are 5 districts, Becky, 3 of which are this hour completely without communication.
Melissa, thank you. Very well delineated there. This is really tough. The Biden administration is expected to announce soon that it is granting Ukraine's request for advanced long-range rocket systems, and Melissa alluding to that request there in her reporting. But the president clarified on Monday that the US won't send rockets, missiles that can reach Russia to be used on those on those rocket systems. CNN's Natasha Bertrand is following this from Washington. Let's be quite clear then about what it is that we understand the US is willing to send and what it isn't at this point, and why, Natasha.
Yeah, Becky. So what we hear from our sources is that the administration is planning on sending those multiple launch rocket systems to the Ukrainians. But the nuance here, a key detail that cannot be understated, is how far the munitions, the rockets that go into those systems, can actually go. Because that is the main concern of the Russians, is that if the Ukrainians get these systems, then they could potentially launch them into Russian territory. Now, the maximum range that the systems can shoot a rocket is about 186 miles, sometimes even more than that. But it depends, again, on the type of munition that you place in that system. So what the Biden administration is now doing is they're considering sending them shorter range rockets to actually put inside those systems, so that they're not actually able to launch those rockets into Russian territory. The systems could perhaps go anywhere from roughly 70 kilometers to 100 kilometers, far less than the 300 kilometers that these systems are actually capable of launching at their maximum. So this is kind of the middle ground that the administration is trying to get to here because of the Russian warnings that any Western kind of facilitation of Ukrainian attacks on Russian soil would be a step too far, would cross a red line.
Fascinating. That's Washington and what is going on there. Thank you. A week and a half after Russian forces seized Mariupol, a cargo ship has left port carrying goods bound for Russia. Russia's defense ministry released this video of the ship leaving port today. It had arrived in Mariupol on Saturday after Russian officials said the port had been demined. The head of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic says it's carrying 2,500 tons of sheet metal to Rostov in western Russia. Well, surging inflation is a global problem. One of the reasons for that is this war in Ukraine. And one of the countries that finds itself in an economic spiral is Pakistan. We speak to the country's finance minister up next. Plus, we will head to the Middle East, where a landmark trade deal has just been signed. Some are calling it a new chapter. We'll explain why after this.
Our mission is to see this young generation of leaders growing up make change in the world. My name is Edlira Debrani, and I'm the communications officer of Finnish School of Kosovo here in Kosovo, Europe. We created a wall of freedom, which is still in our halls. We organized a bake sale where we collected over 500 euros, which are going to be donated to an organization against domestic violence. I would say the one that we are most proud of is the Set in Stone garden. For over a month, each student gathered rocks. We took these rocks, we wrote down our vows and pledges to end modern-day slavery, and then we took all those rocks outside in the middle of our schoolyard, and we spelled out My Freedom Day. So we had this really cool shot where everybody was shouting out My Freedom Day, sort of like a symbolic way to say that our pledges are actually set in stone and they will remain there forever. This, I believe, has made a very long-lasting impact on them, and it's something that they have vowed to actually take on in the following months. You'll see them around the school still doing other things for My Freedom Day.
Africa Avant-Garde, Saturday on CNN, in association with Access Bank.
Welcome back. Now, we've been reporting on the severe impact of Russia's war in Ukraine and how that is impacting Europe's energy market. It's not just Ukraine's western neighbours that are feeling the effects of this war. Pakistan facing severe economic challenges, some of which are a direct result of what is going on in Ukraine. The increase in prices for gas, for oil and for wheat has led to surging energy and food costs. Inflation, the highest it's been in 2 years, the price at the pump creeping up, and only enough foreign currency in the central bank to cover 2 months of imports. The government needs to come up with solutions, and fast. A pivot to Russia, the very country causing all of this chaos, could be an option. Pakistani Foreign Ministry spokesperson last week saying that Pakistan has an, and I quote here, open policy driven by national interest, while confirming that his government is in talks with Russia on the subject of oil and food imports. Well, joining us now live is Pakistan's new finance minister, Miftah Ismail. Thank you for joining us, sir. A lot to get through this hour. Let's start with that quote: rising food prices, rising fuel prices. Pakistan needs help fast. The government then open to buying oil and wheat from Russia, correct?
We have talked about buying wheat from Russia. The previous government talked about buying oil from Russia, but I think Russia is under sanctions and they have not responded to the letter written to them by the previous government. But we've actually asked either Ukraine or Russia, whichever country can sell us wheat, we'd be happy to buy wheat from them.
So oil is out of the question. Is that what you're telling me? Russian oil, out of the question.
The previous government wrote a letter to Russian Federation. That letter was never responded to. The Russia has also not offered us any oil, and it's now under sanctions. So it really, I mean, it's very difficult for me to imagine buying Russian oil.
There are other countries who are buying Russian oil. India, for example, your neighbour. So would you be open to buying Russian oil, cheap Russian oil at this point?
If Russia were to offer us oil at a cheaper rate, and if there were no sanctions on Pakistan to buy Russian oil, then sure, we'd consider that. But at this point, I think that it would be not possible for Pakistani banks to open LCs or to arrange to buy Russian oil, and nor has, for that matter, Russian Federation offered to sell us any oil.
Would you buy it in rubles, out of interest?
We don't have any rubles. So I don't really know. I mean, Pakistan doesn't have any rubles. I don't know where I'd get the rubles from. I guess perhaps we could exchange it with some other currency. But like I said, that's the secondary thing. First, the Russian Federation has to agree to even sell the oil to us, which they haven't.
Let's talk about what's going on in the economy, because, your need for cheap wheat, if that's what it is from Russia, your need for cheap oil, if that were to be what it was from Russia, is clear at this point. Your party orchestrated a vote of no confidence on the grounds that the former Prime Minister was mishandling the economy. I just want you to take a listen to this short excerpt from our interview with Imran Khan last week. Have a listen.
My responsibility is for the well-being. We have 50 million people living below the poverty line. So when Russia offers us 30% discount on oil and 30% discount on wheat imports, India does the same. India is part of the Quad, part of the strategic alliance with the US. India imports oil from the US, but for some reason, this was taken against me, as if I was being anti-US or anti-American.
Now, what you're suggesting that you will do, given an opportunity, is quite similar to Imran Khan's plans. So that begs the question, how can you be so critical of him?
Well, first of all, Russia has neither offered a 30% discount on oil or on wheat. Let's just be clear. I don't know where Khan gets these numbers from, but I know that he just makes up stuff as he goes along. He's the guy who's also saying that, we were brought in to an American conspiracy, and now he's come up with this new thing. If Russia were offering such cheap oil to him or such cheap wheat to him, why didn't he buy it? He did not. The fact of the matter is that, our government has initiated at least, or trying to initiate talks to buy wheat because food is not under sanctions. Oil is under sanctions, and Russia has not even responded to a letter that was written to them by the Imran Khan government. So I don't know where he gets these 30% number from, but this is just really not true.
How are you going to fix this economy, and what is the current state of negotiations with the IMF?
Well, we've had just talks with the IMF in Doha recently, and we are talking to the IMF, and in particular, I think IMF is looking to the budget that I'm going to present in the early part of June to Parliament, and after that, I'm hoping that we would reach an agreement with the fund. What IMF is looking for us to do is to reverse the subsidies on oil and petrol and diesel in particular that the previous government had given. It's also looking for me to reverse some power sector subsidies, electric tariff subsidies that the previous government had done in contravention with its own agreement with the fund. And then it's looking to the budget that I'll present. So I am pretty confident.
Go on.
I'm pretty confident that we should be able to get an agreement with the fund, but that there would be some austerity in the budget, some measures to increase taxation in the next budget.
Why was it such a difficult decision to raise fuel prices when you must have known that Pakistan could not afford those subsidies that had been placed on fuel prices by the previous government? When do you plan to remove them? And will that be enough, do you believe, to get this IMF deal over the line?
Well, I mean, like I said, I mean, that's the first thing that we need to do is to reverse those fuel subsidies and power subsidies. And then also there are certain, budget numbers that I think that the IMF is probably hoping to see. Why was it difficult? Because this was done precisely as a trap for us. Imran Khan, in the waning days of his government, did a few things to violate all these agreements with the IMF, including giving these unsustainably high subsidies on fuel, on diesel and petrol, and also on power, electricity. And he knew that we couldn't, sustain this. And when we came to power, he's now, going from city to city, trying to rally the people and coming up with these theories about conspiracies and all that stuff, and putting a lot of political pressure on us. So a new government coming into power was finding it difficult to raise the prices right away. But we have taken a very important step last week,
yeah, the conceit of his argument is that the economy was actually in relatively good shape, and he quoted a number of growth statistics to me to substantiate that. I want to pull up some numbers. Your foreign exchange reserves dwindling down almost a third from the start of the year. The rupee down 11% to the dollar in the same time. The question must be, what is your government doing and planning to do to stop the rot? I mean, the current relationship with the new government and nations like China, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who in the past will have stepped in to help, surely is also important at this point. I wonder what those relationships are like.
Well, I think we have very good relations with all the three countries that you named, and plus a lot of other countries. And the Prime Minister is flying to Turkey even as we speak. And Imran Khan had damaged relations with China. He rolled back the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. I think he'd also annoyed Saudis and the UAE governments. But we're trying to repair relationships with them as well as all the Western countries who are the biggest importers of Pakistani goods, US and the EU markets. And this is a committee of nations that we want to be, a full member of, and we don't wish to annoy countries for our political benefits. So we're trying to repair a relationship, but in order to bring Pakistani economy back on track, the number one, decisions have to be made in Pakistan, and no country can really bail us out unless we decide to, if you will, bail us out ourselves. Unless we decide to have a disciplined program and live within our means.
Imran Khan says that your government is a puppet government of the United States, and he says that he has evidence to substantiate that, although as yet that evidence isn't in the isn't open. It isn't open to the public. Do you believe that evidence exists? Are you a puppet government of the United States?
I mean, if you knew the history of Imran Khan and all the things that he's said in the past, and he's backtracked, and all the accusations that he's made in 2013, every time he loses an election, he makes an accusation about stuff. This man, just like I said, makes up facts, as he goes along. And today it's a conspiracy. I mean, and by the way, I mean, the no confidence motion was filed on, I think, the 8th of February or something like this. And the vote took place in early April. And he didn't think of the conspiracy till the 27th of March.
Let me ask you this question. Wouldn't the certainty provided by elections sort all of this out and be ultimately better for the economy going forward? I mean, this is a country, every country, many countries are struggling with inflation at the moment. The economies of many developing nations are particularly badly hit, but as a result of the Ukraine war. But Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable of developing countries to rising commodity prices. The certainty of a new election, sir, surely would be better for the economy at this point, wouldn't it?
There is an argument about that is made within our coalition, within our party. Both of our former prime ministers, the leader of our party, Nawaz Sharif, was also of the opinion that we should go into an election sooner rather than later, in a few weeks. But then when we came into power, the economy was such in a precarious position that it was important that we take these measures. We couldn't even wait for a caretaker government because in Pakistan, we can't hold the elections. An elected government cannot hold the elections. We have to go to an interim government for 3 months. And IMF will not make a deal with an interim government, so only we could make a deal for 1 year. I extended the program or requested the IMF to extend the program by 1 year. So if the economy were not in as bad a shape as it is, if we're not as precarious the position we are in, if the current account deficit had not increased, foreign exchange reserves had not decreased so rapidly, we would have gone into an election. But Imran Khan has left us such an economy in such doldrums that we have no choice but to now stabilize the economy and then go in election in good time.
Okay, and there is no clear timeline for that at present. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, it's being touted as a new chapter for the Middle East. Israel and the UAE have inked a free trade deal. We'll tell you why this is so significant and what it could mean for the region. And while gun reform is a thorny issue in the United States, it's a whole different approach in neighbouring Canada. We'll tell you what the country's Prime Minister is doing there to curb gun violence. Stay with us.
Egypt is transitioning towards a sustainable, circular economy. Through the opening of the Gabal Al Asfar wastewater treatment plant, it is using treated water to irrigate agricultural land and is producing organic fertilizers. The plant has been designed to reduce waste and optimizes the use of water resources. It generates electricity and saves carbon emissions, ensuring that over 8 million people across the country live better, healthier lives.
No holds barred.
Out front tonight, hypocrite in chief.
No nonsense.
How stupid do you think we are?
Because getting to the truth matters. Aaron Burnett out front, Tuesday to Saturday on CNN.
Welcome to The Lead. We begin with breaking news. The United States has plunged into a recession. We're seeing infections at an all-time high. What's your reaction to that? Here are the facts.
The Lead with Jake Tapper.
The region's post-pandemic, or mid-pandemic, I should say, performance is, as you go across the 20 or so countries that make up the Middle East and North Africa, is as diverse as the 500 million people or so that live in it. We've been saying for a long time that the only way we can address, as a sort of silver bullet, the youth unemployment crisis and socioeconomic problems that we have and challenges we have across the region is by nurturing small businesses to create jobs, create opportunities, and pursue innovation. The problem is no one was investing in small businesses, but I see that changing. We need to create businesses as change agents who can in turn create the solutions both on a social and economic objective. One of the other trends we're seeing is where businesses are aligning with their social and environmental impact in addition to their, of course, financial impact as being one and the same in terms of stakeholder returns. So that, I think, is a positive trend we have to nurture.
I'm Blake Essig in Tokyo, and this is CNN.
Welcome back. You're watching Connect the World. I'm Becky Anderson out of London for you at just after 4:30. For the first time ever, Israel has a trade deal with an Arab state. Israeli officials have signed a free trade agreement, an FTA, with the United Arab Emirates, where you usually find me hosting this show. Now, that deal removes most tariffs on food, medicine, cosmetics and other goods. The two countries established ties in 2020 in what was then a groundbreaking move. Well, both sides anticipating a big boost in trade. CNN's Hadass Gold is following this for us from Jerusalem. And, you know, this is being touted as a really significant move. Let's just explain why that is.
Well, it's the first ever free trade deal that Israel has ever signed with an Arab country, and Israeli officials are also saying it's the fastest signed trade deal in Israeli history. What it will do is will remove duties on 96% of traded goods between the UAE and Israel, mostly food, agriculture, cosmetics, medical equipment, and medication. And officials hope that the free trade deal will eventually push the value of non-oil bilateral trade to up to $10 billion per year within in 5 years. The Emiratis and the Israelis say that it will help. They hope that will help foster much more business between the two countries, especially from the Israelis using the UAE as a hub of sorts, as a hub to get into other places such as Asia, such as the rest of the Middle East. Dorian Barak, who's the co-founder of the UAE-Israel Business Council, has said that already trade between the UAE and Israel has exceeded their expectations. They said that they estimated trade this year between Israel and the UAE would be about $2 billion, but they've already exceeded $1 billion in the first quarter. And he is saying that the UAE is already becoming the place for Israeli businesses as their hub to get to places like Asia, obviously a big place of business for many Israeli companies. What's interesting, though, Becky, is of course what's happening in the political arena at the same time as this deal was signed, because it was just yesterday that the UAE Foreign Ministry put out a statement condemning what they said were extremist settlers who they said came into the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound on Sunday, which was Jerusalem Day. And of course, there's been really high tensions in Jerusalem, in Israel, in the West Bank over the last few months. And this goes to show you that while the UAE still is supporting Palestinian statehood, is still putting out statements like we saw Monday condemning what they call extremist settlers, that is not affecting the economic ties and the diplomatic ties between these two countries. Becky.
Hadas Gold is in Jerusalem for you. Hadas, thank you. Let's get you up to speed on some of the other stories that are on our radar right now. And Russia's foreign minister is heading to Saudi Arabia on Wednesday to meet his Gulf counterparts. This just ahead of an OPEC Plus meeting. Russia, part of that alliance of oil-producing nations, of course. It's not clear why and what Sergei Lavrov will discuss in Riyadh. Gulf states have remained neutral during Russia's war on Ukraine. China's embassy in Washington says it firmly opposes a U.S. delegation's visit to Taiwan. That group arrived in Taipei Monday for an unannounced visit. You see here Tammy Duckworth, Senator Tammy Duckworth, meeting with President Tsai Ing-wen and others. Christy Lou Stout takes a closer look at that visit.
A U.S. congressional delegation led by Senator Tammy Duckworth is in Taiwan for an unannounced 3-day visit. They stressed the importance of U.S. and Taiwan partnership on security as well as economic collaboration. On President Tsai Ing-wen, she thanked Senator Duckworth for America's donation of COVID-19 vaccines as well as U.S. support on the security front.
We look forward to deeper and closer U.S.-Taiwan relations in matters of regional security. At the same time, to address the challenges of the post-pandemic era. Taiwan and the U.S. have reviewed and assessed the many facets of our trade cooperation.
China slammed the visit, with its embassy in Washington saying it firmly opposes it. And in a statement, a spokesperson of the Chinese embassy in the U.S. says, quote, "We urge the U.S. side to earnestly abide by the One China principle and the 3 Sino-U.S. joint communiques, handle Taiwan-related issues in a cautious and proper way, stop all forms of official interactions with Taiwan, and avoid sending wrong signals to the Taiwan independent separatist forces," unquote. The visit comes right after the U.S. president's visit to the region and his assertion that the U.S. would intervene militarily if China tries to take Taiwan by force, a comment that he has made before and which was quickly downplayed again by the White House. But tension is rising in the region. On Monday, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense said 30 Chinese warplanes made incursions into its air defense identification zone, the highest daily figure in more than 4 months. A Taiwan Member of Parliament Wang Ting-yu calls it, quote, "a very worrying trend," tweeting this, quote, "The more China does this, the sooner we become used to it, and it will become increasingly difficult to determine if China is just doing their routine exercises or are they preparing to launch an attack on Taiwan. This is a very worrying trend." Taiwan's president has vowed to maintain peace while adding that she will defend Taiwan if attacked. China claims Taiwan as its own territory and hasn't ruled out taking it by force if necessary. Christy Lou Stout, CNN, Hong Kong.
Well, in a show of cooperation between the US and New Zealand, the US President Joe Biden welcomes New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to the White House on Tuesday. The two leaders are expected to discuss Indo-Pacific trade policies and domestic terrorism in both countries. While meeting Ms. Ardern, Mr. Biden just spoke about last week's mass shooting at an elementary school. Have a listen.
There's an expression by an Irish poet that says, too long a suffering makes a stone of the heart. Well, there's an awful lot of suffering. I've been to more mass shooting aftermaths than I think any president in American history, unfortunately. And it's just so much of it is preventable, and the devastation is amazing. Yesterday, or not the day before, I was down in Texas, and people sat in a room, about 250 of them in a large room, with me for almost 4 hours. Nobody left. They wanted to air until I spoke to every single person in that room. Every single person. They waited till the very end, and the pain is palpable.
A bipartisan group of US senators is meeting remotely today to look for common ground on gun control. The meeting prompted by that massacre at an elementary school in Texas last week. Texas Republican John Cornyn says topics include background checks, limiting ownership of certain guns for people with criminal records or mental illness. Most Senate Republicans oppose any form of gun control policy, and Senate rules make it extremely difficult to pass legislation. While some US lawmakers are talking about gun reform, at least it's a different story in Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just announced a new bill that will place a national freeze on handgun ownership across the country. The legislation would cap sales, transfers and imports of guns, amongst other measures. Bryn Gingras joins us now. Just explain what it is that we have heard from Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister in Canada, neighbouring the US, of course.
Yeah, and Becky, someone else high in Parliament said this about this. Gun ownership in Canada is a privilege, not a right. So that just gives you the two different mindsets you're dealing with here with Canada versus the United States. As far as this bill is concerned, it's pretty extensive. It basically wants to just cap the number of firearms, handguns that are in that country. So this means that it'll be illegal to sell, transfer, import, buy any handguns in Canada. Also part of this would be fining gun smugglers and traffickers, assigning criminal penalties to these people who try to get guns illegally into the country, and actually giving law enforcement more leverage and more money to actually enforce these rules. Something else they're looking at is revoking gun licenses for those involved in domestic violence, criminal harassment, also those red flag laws that you hear thrown about, especially here in the United States. It would allow the courts to essentially take away the right of a gun owner if they prove to be harmful to themselves or to someone else. And then one other thing to mention, rifle magazines, they would not be allowed to hold more than 5 rounds of ammunition. And that would entail gun manufacturers actually having to repurpose how they make the guns so that it could abide by that law. So very extensive, wide sweeping proposal here by Trudeau. It's something that he's campaigned on. I want you to listen quickly to his thinking behind all of this.
As a government, as a society, we have a responsibility to act to prevent more tragedies. Canadians certainly don't need assault-style weapons that were designed to kill the largest number of people in the shortest amount of time. Gun violence is a complex problem, but at the end of the day, the math is really quite simple. The fewer the guns in our communities, the safer everyone will be.
And Becky, it looks like he does have a lot of support from Parliament. This could go go through really by the fall.
Oh, amazing. Thank you, Bryn. We're taking a very short break. Back after this.
When you grow more, you'll naturally have more to balance. With an expanding community of female entrepreneurs and 22% of working Africans starting businesses, support for new and growing enterprises across the continent has never been more important. Access Bank's digital loans have so far provided over 260 billion naira to upwards of 1.8 million customers and counting. Access, more than banking.
The world's biggest business stories in one place. Expert analysis. From every corner of the globe. Marketplace Africa, Asia, Europe, and Middle East. With CNNBusiness.com.
Once in a generation opportunity.
Technology, innovation, business.
We share this place, we all belong. We have to restore this planet's soul. Teach it something more than what we know. Give it water, give it sun, room to grow. I can see a better tomorrow. I can see a better tomorrow.
This month, CNN's As Equals team is highlighting depression during pregnancy and early motherhood. Now, this is one of the most common mental health disorders amongst women, wherever they live in the world. In India, the risk is heightened by the pressures and hardships of marrying early and moving away from the family and the resulting isolation. Well, today we hear from a counsellor in Eastern India about a mental health hotline established to help mums in need, and some of those mothers talk about the hotline and the issues they face around maternal mental health. Have a listen.
नमस्कार, ये है साम्या मोबाइल वाणी जो 24 घंटा चले हैं और फ्री मिले हैं।
In 2018, in rural Bihar, India, two non-profit organizations created a counseling phone line to help mothers with their mental health. For 7 months, it provided in-person, one-to-one counseling and pre-recorded messages offering advice and support. Shwetanjali was one of the counselors who received training to work on the project and helped mothers within her community.
तो सबसे पहले मानसिक स्वास्थ्य के बारे में मुझे कुछ भी मालूम नहीं था। तो हम लोग जो कोई शब्द हम लोगों के मन में आता है और हम लोग उससे लगा लेते हैं कि ये होगा, तो पागल मानसिक स्वास्थ्य से हम लोग पागल को जोड़ते थे कि पागल होगी तो मानसिक स्वास्थ्य। अभी कैसे हम किसी के घर जाके, किसी महिला के घर जाके उसके मानसिक बीमारी के बारे में बात करेंगे।
Innovators in Health, a technology development charity, and SCARF India, a mental health organisation, teamed up to create an experimental solution to help women safely seek help in a region where stigma around mental health is so prevalent.
जैसे मोबाइल था तो मोबाइल में अपन कान में सटा लेते हैं, अपन कोनो काम करते हैं और चाहे अपन बतियाते हैं, कभी सो जाते हैं तो अपन फोन धरा कर अपन सुनते हैं। खुशी हो रहे, बहुत अच्छा लगे रहे किया कि पहला बच्चा रहे के लिए खुशी हो रहे। जैसे बतबे रहथनी मोबाइल पर जे बच्चा खुश अथी बुले है, देह में दौड़े है, जितना अहाँ खुश रखबे, जितना अहाँ बात बोलबे अच्छा बात, उतना बच्चा का खुशी मिलते, उतना खुद कर नहीं तखनी कोई नहीं रहे बात करे वाला। बेटा के खेलाई खातिन भेजले आई सकुलिया हो हमरा बेरिया।
We have women in our catchment as such who are in the 20-25 age group who share that they got married before they turned 18. As they get out of their own house to a new village, to a new setting, they are bereft of all the social network which they had over there. It's a conservative patriarchal setup, endemic misogyny, and the in-laws are not very supportive.
पहला बच्चा मने 3 गो खराब है। सास भी पति भी सब तरह का बात बोले।
Such is the taboo around mental health, many would not declare their emotions openly, and counsellors had to learn to decode what their patients were saying.
A woman suffering from postpartum depression would not be outright saying that, okay, I'm feeling something like a bad day at work. What they would reflect and refer to is that I'm not feeling connected with the child, I'm having a severe headache. You would struggle to find a consultant psychiatrist or a gynecologist who would discuss on these topics.
When a lack of funding forced the services to stop in 2019, Shwetanjali continued to provide help in her community in her own free time.
फिलहाल तो अभी हम लोगों के पास काम बहुत है, फ़ोन करती है 2 बार 3 बार 4 बार, हम अभी नहीं जा पाते, तुरंत नहीं जा पाते हैं। और वो महिला ऐसे फ़ोन करके अगर बताती है कि हम बोल देते हैं क्या दिक्कत है बताइए, खांसी बुखार है या फिर कुछ दिक्कत है, तो नहीं आप घर पे आइएगा, मिलिए, उसके बाद हम बताएं, कुछ बात करना है आपसे। तुरंत तो नहीं जा पाते, लेकिन समय निकाल के अगर होता है तो हम जाके मिलते हैं, लेकिन उस तरीके से नहीं मिल पाते जैसे पहले मिलते थे।
The funding for Samya Mobile Bani hotline may have vanished, but of course the issues facing women have not.
जैसे पहले हमारा साथ में झगड़ा झमेला हमारा साथ गुजरे रहे, वो है अब भी अगला आदमी के साथ गुजरे, कि जे हमारा साथ होले वो अगला आदमी के साथ नहीं, जे चीज़ हमारा सुविधा मिले वो चीज़ ओकरा मिले के चाही।
अगर अहाँ के कोई परेशानी है या कुछ बोले ला चाहा छिए तब 9 नंबर दबा के जानकार से बात कर सकलिए हन।
Hello. You're watching Connect the World. Ahead on the show, air travel. Let me do that again. I'm going to start again, put my teeth in. Air travel meltdown. Thousands of flights cancelled around the world. We take a look at what's happening in the UK and why airlines are struggling to keep up with the post-COVID travel surge. That coming up after this.
We'll be landing shortly in South Africa.
Sunny day in Cape Town and today we've got
We invite you with open arms to our wonderful country.
Well, travel disruptions have led to headaches for travellers around the world over the past couple of days. If you are one of them, you will know what I'm talking about. In the US, bad weather and staffing issues led to some 2,500 flight cancellations during what was this 4-day Memorial Day weekend across the Atlantic. In Dublin, for example, videos like these have circulated, and they've circulated around the world. People waiting in security queues extending outside the airport for hours. Many of them, of course, well, yep, missing their flights. Nada Bashir is joining me now. You've got the latest out of the UK, and I'm afraid the story here doesn't seem to be any better. It's half-term week, what's known as half-term week, of course, for the kids. They are mostly out of school. We have a bank holiday at the end of this week for the Platinum Jubilee. This was always going to be a busy week.
Yeah, absolutely. And it typically is always a busy week, and this really couldn't have come at a worse time. Many would have been hoping to make the most of those extra few days off to get away for a quick break, but we are seeing significant delays, flight cancellations across the board, across the country. Many of those flights, of course, would have been heading to Europe, so this is a continent-wide issue.
Why? Why are we seeing this?
Well, look, during the pandemic, obviously, the aviation sector was hit particularly hard, and we saw significant layoffs across airlines during the pandemic. And now these airlines are being expected to sort of get back on track, back to those pre-pandemic levels, at least in the UK we're talking about. And they are really struggling to do that. They've been hit really badly financially. And so they are struggling with these staffing shortages, trying to get back, of course, to meet the demand that we're seeing now. But we've also seen a surge in passengers using vouchers that they would have been issued when their flights were cancelled during the pandemic. So now they're using those during this, what is typically